As a result of stress, rising culinary star Martin Lee lost the ability to taste. Experts recommended fresh air and peace. So he went to the distant mountains where his relative used to live in one of the villages. Having found a beautiful place, the main character stopped for a picnic. He took with him the essentials for preparing delicious food. A few minutes later, the meat was frying in the pan, spreading delicious aromas throughout the area. The young man watched his favorite process with satisfaction. It was possible to relax, and a can of beer was perfect for this. Martin remembered how he came to his grandfather's abandoned house, which turned out to be a passage to another world. And that's how his adventures and meeting new friends began. Giant Francis was the captain of the knights of the local town. Several different races lived in this place, including Beastmen or werewolves. Little Luna often ran away from home. Her guard Liam had to find the bully and return her to her mother. The magician and sorcerer Janice was an alchemist and lived in the city of People. The third side of another world was owned by an elven civilization. The first acquaintance of the main character was Abigail with her bird. Martin encountered all these interesting creatures during his journey to the beautiful mountain landscapes. It all started when a young man, in search of silence, went to a distant village to restore his nerves and health after winning numerous competitions of famous chefs of the world. The building of the former tea house stood empty for many years after the death of his grandfather, and the main character decided to stay here. At Martin's request, his old friend and manager Dennis took him to a remote place. The main character was afraid to get out of the car until he was sure that there was no one nearby. The young man was so tired of the sudden popularity after winning the show that he imagined journalists on every corner, constantly pursuing him. Martin was reassured by his friend's words that no one would go into the wilderness, and he took off his mask. The young man stood at the door of his new life and remembered the moments of glory. Martin Lee recently became the most popular chef. He was recognized everywhere. The young man graduated from one of the best culinary schools in the world and won international competitions in Paris. They tried to invite him to all the shows and programs. It seemed that a bright future awaited the young, talented professional. However, Martin was very worried about his popularity. His fans did not allow him to work in peace, constantly distracting him and following him everywhere. Envious colleagues reproached the talented chef for having developed a star fever and for treating them with disdain. Numerous rumors about the young chef's misbehavior and poor professionalism were spread on social media, with one of the sources of gossip being his colleague and former friend Warren. Martin was under constant stress, tired of his sudden popularity and false rumors. The mountain village was a great place to relax. The main character decided to go there to recover and hide from prying eyes. In order not to waste time and continue his favorite business, the young man wanted to open a small home restaurant. Before they started unpacking, the friends decided to have a snack. On the way, the guys stopped at a cafe and ordered food to go. For the first time in a long time, Martin ate food that someone else had cooked. Dennis watched his friend closely. The smell was disgusting. The main character was ready to kill whoever could ruin the spaghetti like that. The young man took a chance to try the dish. The most important result of the stress was that Martin lost the ability to taste, especially of his own food, which was what worried the young chef the most. Out of frustration that he couldn't fully experience the dish, the main character broke the plate. The young man consulted many specialists, but the doctor's verdict was the same. Psychological trauma was the cause. Doctors advised getting rid of the source of stress and finding another hobby. However, Martin loved to cook, and he didn't want to change anything. Dennis didn't like his friend's decision to stay in the wilderness. The main character did not agree. He really liked the mountains and the silence. After saying goodbye to Dennis and taking the advice of doctors, Martin set off on a hike. The taxi was supposed to take him closer to the peaks. The young man wondered if he had taken everything he needed for the camping trip. The driver watched the strange young man closely. The taxi driver was surprised that the guy was going to the mountains in light clothes and without a tent. The main character asked to stop the car near an abandoned village. The houses were empty. There had been no one left in the small village for a long time. Martin was here for the first time in several years. He had not come here since his grandfather died. The young man decided to tidy up the old house a little. The young man was surprised that the door to the barn was open. Coming closer, the main character saw a strange light in the depths of the pantry. Martin prepared to fight off the would-be thief, holding a sturdy bag for kitchen tools and utensils. Suddenly, something moved in the bushes, causing the young man to scream in fear. The cute ginger cat was happy to meet a person. The young man calmed down. From the look of the village, it seemed that there had been no people here for a long time. The main character went inside the barn to find the switch. Something alerted Martin. The room seemed very large to him. The young man carefully moved into the depths of the utility room. After some time, the young man felt a breath of wind. What he saw ahead shocked the famous chef. The main character stood on the edge of a huge abyss, a strange glow surrounding him. His foot slipped off the cliff and Martin fell screaming. The young man continued to fly for several seconds, not imagining what awaited him ahead. After some time, the young man woke up and opened his eyes. The main character was lying on the grass with branches of huge, beautiful trees hanging over him. Something wet and warm touched my hand. Martin screamed loudly in horror and jumped up. The small, furry animal looked at the stranger with surprise. Suddenly, the squirrel-like creature spread its large ears and flew away. The main character watched the flight with curiosity. He had never seen such animals before. Something moved in the nearby bushes, causing Martin to flinch again. There was a small bunny sitting nearby in the grass. When the fluffy bunny stood up, he looked like a giant monster from a horror movie. Fortunately, the unknown beast did not pay attention to the young man and calmly jumped on. Martin was shocked and ran. It was necessary to urgently find a way out of this dangerous, mysterious place. Evening came, and the main character realized that he was completely lost. The young man decided to look for a place to spend the night. The young man began to unpack his magic travel bag. The first thing the main character did was make a fire. Martin looked at the flames. There was not a soul around, and there was no connection either. Feeling hungry, the cook decided to do his favorite thing. The young man had taken some food supplies in advance to make it easier to cope in field conditions. But now, the bag contained only mushrooms and butter. The main character had to use what he had in his reserves. After a few minutes, the dish was ready, but there was no spices or salt at all. Martin looked at his creation with disbelief, doubting that it could be eaten. There was no other food, so I had to try what I could get. The famous chef was completely upset. He still couldn't feel the taste. The frying pan with mushrooms flew to the side. The young man was ready to cry from despair. The main character was surrounded on all sides by powerful tree trunks. The flames of the fire warmed and calmed the young man a little. Suddenly, there was a cracking sound of branches. Martin shuddered in fear and looked around cautiously. The glowing lights of the eyes of unknown animals looked at their prey. The creatures came very close and resembled wolves. The only weapon the young man found on himself was a small folding knife. The predator in the bushes opened its mouth with powerful fangs and prepared to jump. The main character could already feel his breath next to him. Martin grabbed the blade and prepared to defend himself, screaming loudly to try to scare away the terrible beasts and closing his eyes in horror. It became quiet. The young man sat motionless, shaking all over with fear. After some time, the young man decided to open his eyes, surprised that nothing had happened and he was still alive. There was nothing around. All the toothy predators were gone. Martin heard sounds nearby that resembled loud chomping. The young man looked carefully in the direction from which the strange noise was coming. A small, fluffy animal was licking an empty frying pan. The baby looked at the young man and wagged his tail in greeting. Martin couldn't figure out what kind of animal it was. The white, shaggy creature looked most like a puppy. The beast's huge blue eyes looked joyfully at the stranger. The dog barked and went about his usual business. The main character tried to determine the breed, not understanding where the baby came from in the forest. The puppy began to show signs of attention to his new friend. A few moments later, the fluffy lump was already sitting in Martin's arms, who had previously disliked dogs and did not understand why everyone considered them the cutest creatures. The young man noticed that the dog's fur was very coarse, probably because it was wild. The young man looked closely at the shaggy stranger. A guess occurred to the main character, apparently. There was a small wolf in front of him. Martin imagined with horror that somewhere nearby there was a she-wolf lurking and coming for her cub. The young man was afraid to think what would happen to him if the predator decided that he had kidnapped the baby. It was quiet all around. The fluffy lump sat calmly in the arms of his new friend. The main character was very tired from a busy day and went to bed. The young man no longer cared at all whether he would die of hunger or be eaten by predators, and he fell asleep. In his sleep, Martin felt himself being pulled somewhere by his shirt. The young man had no strength left to resist, and after a while the movement stopped. Martin opened his eyes and tried to get up. The wolf cub dragged him to the magical abyss into which he had fallen. The main character did not know whether he would be able to return home or whether he would end up in some other world again. The furry little boy watched as his friend hesitated to make a choice. The white lump knew the outcome and boldly rushed to help Martin. The wolf cub ran and pushed the doubting boy into the abyss. During the flight, the young man thought that he might again end up in a dangerous place or simply crash. The puppy calmly watched his friend fly away into the distance. The movement stopped. Martin felt something hard underneath him and decided to open his eyes to look around. The young man saw that he was sitting in a familiar village next to his grandfather's barn. The young man could not believe that he had returned safe and sound. The main character tried to get up, remembering that he didn't even thank his shaggy friend. Hearing a familiar bark, Martin looked around. The contented puppy was sitting nearby and happily wagging its ears. This is how the young chef got a furry pet. At home, the young man tried to wash his shaggy friend, who deftly ran away from the water. It was necessary to choose a nickname, and after numerous attempts, the wolf cub received the name Charlie. The baby slept on the bed with his friend. Martin felt warm and calm when the white lump was nearby. The next morning, the main character woke up feeling refreshed. The young man was surprised. For the first time in several months, he managed to get enough sleep. It was time to start cleaning, but first Martin wanted to pick out some food for Charlie. The baby categorically refused dog food. Food for cats and other pets was also rejected. The upset protagonist went to the kitchen. The young man made himself breakfast. He still didn't feel anything, but at least he enjoyed the process. Martin ate the food in front of him with disappointment, hoping that the taste would be restored someday. Charlie quickly jumped onto the table and began to eat human food with great pleasure. The main character tried to drive away the bully. The young man noticed that his shaggy friend ate only the dishes he had prepared, without touching the semi-finished products from various companies. The young man began to analyze the situation. Martin gave Charlie a choice of 2 steaks with different sauces to confirm his guess. The cook took good meat and cooked it the same way. The only difference was in the gravy. Charlie sniffed the store-bought sauce cautiously. The chef watched what the baby would choose. The puppy began to eat meat with store-bought gravy, waving his luxurious tail with pleasure. The second plate featured Martin's signature sauce, which he developed himself and won a special prize. Charlie swallowed the second piece at high speed, his tail still wagging in delight. The contented animal licked its lips peacefully after a delicious meal. Martin realized with satisfaction that this was an unusual animal, and that he would not be able to feed it just anything. It was necessary to start renovating the building in order to open a restaurant, so the main character went to paint the walls. The young man didn't really like the result. The color was not at all what he wanted. A well-fed Charlie lay quietly nearby watching his friend. An elderly man suddenly approached from behind and explained that this was paint for interior use, and therefore not suitable for the exterior walls of the building. Martin was scared. He didn't know who he was talking to, again remembering the journalists. The stranger introduced himself as the village elder. Henry Brown did not wait for the young man to come to him for an introduction and went to the meeting himself. The elder looked at the painted facade with displeasure. The result was disappointing. The man noticed the furry animal. Henry promised to send helpers and tried to pet the puppy, but it deftly eluded strangers' hands. Martin wanted to refuse outside help, hoping that he could handle the repairs himself. However, the headman categorically ordered not to touch the paint. On the weekend, he would bring a specialist who would help the young man. The main character had no choice but to agree with the elder's decision. Several days passed. Martin was busy sorting out the dishes and relaxing, admiring nature. Early in the morning on a day off, Henry came to the young man with an assistant. The farmer's son, Adam Lee, brought the necessary tools. The chef watched the specialist's work carefully. Martin was left with only minor errands to run, and he couldn't understand why strangers were helping him. The headman and Adam tried to correct the mistakes and repaint the house. Henry asked the new owner what would happen here. Rumors were talking about a new restaurant. The young chef said that he plans to prepare European cuisine, mainly Italian. The farmer was interested in the menu and asked if there would be pork cutlets, which his wife Grace loved so much. During the break, the men sat at the table talking about their dreams. Adam's wife was pregnant. The nearest cafe had long since closed, and her husband was unable to cook her favorite dish. Martin hadn't planned to include cutlets on the menu, but they weren't difficult to make. The chef thought about the possibility of preparing food to order in the future, but he was afraid that he could not try what he made for his customers. Charlie seemed to read his friend's thoughts and immediately reminded him of himself. The beast seemed to say that it would help and was happy to taste the food. The main character thought this was a way out of the temporarily established situation. Martin promised Adam to make pork cutlets for Grace. The young man was glad to be of service to his assistants. In the evening, the young chef began the experiment. He had previously asked the man in detail about the taste of the product and the sauce that was served in the village cafe. The main character was glad that he could take up his favorite business again. The furry friend sat nearby and waited for everything to be ready. Martin felt a surge of energy and was ready to experiment until he got a positive result. The knife was flying in the hands of the famous chef. All the ingredients were collected. After a while, a fragrant smell spread throughout the kitchen. The cutlets looked delicious. Charlie got the first portion. His tale was the quality control of the product. Martin noted with disappointment that the furry object's movements were slow, which meant the taste was weak. In the next batch, the chef changed the composition of the sauce so that it was less sweet. However, the tail was still almost motionless. Charlie, with his belly full, could no longer move, but the experiment continued. After losing his ability to taste, cooking became a torment for the protagonist. He could not determine what he had created, so Charlie became his indicator. The next day, Martin's new friends came to visit him. Adam and his wife sat at the table and waited anxiously for their order to be brought. Grace was glad to be able to get out of the house. The girl had not been to a cafe for a long time. She could not go far, and was glad that the new restaurant would be very close. Finally, the cook appeared. He was glad to see his guests. Martin brought the first order. The smell and appearance of the cutlets were very appetizing. The farmer's wife looked at the delicious dish with admiration. Grace took the knife and cut off the first piece. The girl slowly brought the cutlet to her mouth, anticipating its delicious taste. The men watched Grace's reaction with bated breath. The guest was delighted. She had never tasted such delicious cutlets. The meat was juicier and crispier, and the girl found the sauce similar to the previous one. Memories of past years came flooding back to Adam's wife. Martin was pleased that he was able to please the guests. The Lee family sat at a table and reminisced about their first date. Then the couple also went to a restaurant, and since then the girl has loved pork cutlets. Although, of course, the most precious thing was the memories of the happy time. The young cook was glad that his new friends were happy again. Martin glanced at his chief assistant out of the corner of his eye. A contented little Charlie with a full belly lay nearby. After the first visitors left, the main character became thoughtful. The young man decided that he didn't have to cook only Italian cuisine. The young chef thought that the wishes of future clients should also be taken into account. Martin noticed that his four-legged friend was sad. The protagonist suggested that Charlie missed his forest. The baby seemed to understand his owner and pricked up his ears. The young man thought that it was not easy for the wolf cub to be in the world of people where he had so unexpectedly ended up. It was necessary to return the animal to its usual home, although Martin became very attached to his furry friend. Thinking about taking Charlie home, the protagonist remembered the horrors of that world and shuddered. The young man even began to shake from the terrible memories. He was not ready to return to the mysterious forest. The baby looked at the man with hope. There was sadness in Charlie's eyes. He really missed his old life. So Martin found himself in another world again, deciding to throw a farewell picnic for his friend. The main character constantly felt someone's gaze on him and already repented of his actions. Charlie confidently led his master forward. Suddenly, the young man felt the freshness and smell of the pond. Having passed through the bushes, the young man froze in amazement. In front of Martin was a huge lake with clear blue water, and mountain ranges were visible in the distance. The main character caught himself thinking that he had never seen such beauty before. The fluffy baby was happy. He ran to the shore. The water in his eyes were almost the same color. Martin decided to arrange a picnic spot near the lake, and as a farewell, he prepared a little surprise for his pet. The cook took out his equipment and began to prepare the dish. The young man had prepared pieces of very expensive meat in advance. After adding spices and oil, the young man lit a fire. The schnitzel turned out very aromatic and looked appetizing. Charlie ate with great pleasure, his tail never stopping spinning for a minute. Martin took out a can of beer and looked at the beautiful landscape with satisfaction. One thing was upsetting: the taste still hasn't returned. The main character decided not to be upset and to rest. The view was truly stunning. The young man relaxed and enjoyed the mysterious silence. However, the calm did not last long. The young cook felt a sharp object at his throat. Martin saw the sword and was very scared. A rough male voice behind him asked the young man who he was and what he was doing here. The giant looked very menacing. The weapon was really real. The young man could not move from fear. He could hardly answer that he was a simple cook. The guard could not believe the stranger's words. He had never met strangers at the border. The squire demanded that the young man tell the truth. Suddenly, the man heard sounds and looked around. A small white wolf cub was eating the last pieces of meat from the plate with gusto. Martin was willing to pay money to be released. The menacing stranger sheathed his sword and apologized. The man introduced himself as Francis, the captain of the Knights of a small human town, currently patrolling the borders of his territory. The main character also gave his name, not understanding why the warrior's attitude towards him had changed so abruptly. A well-fed Charlie slept peacefully on the grass, not paying attention to anyone. The guard explained that if a white wolf accompanies a person, it is a good sign. Francis said that this species of predators inherited the blood of an ancient god. The wolf god had the ability to see good and evil and was very wise. The pack of white wolves inherited some of the abilities of their ancient predecessor. One of the representatives of the predators was now very close to the interlocutors and was sleeping peacefully. Martin was amazed by the discovery. Now he understood many things. The protagonist remembered how the deity's descendant quickly destroyed food and cleverly avoided strangers. Francis learned that the stranger was simply preparing food and enjoying the local scenery. In a beautiful place, food really does taste different. The knight's attention was drawn to a plate with delicious pieces of meat. Martin invited the uninvited guest to try the food. It was impossible to resist the smell that emanated from the dish. Francis carefully took the piece and put it in his mouth. The guard was dumbfounded. He could not understand how the meat could be so juicy and tender. The knight's gaze stopped on the strange jar in the young man's hands. The main character said that he took beer with him. The man could not refuse to try the unfamiliar potion. He was interested in what they drink in another country. Francis downed the liquid from the special can in one gulp, not believing that beer could be rich and tart. The knight was completely delighted. The drink seemed very tasty to him. The formidable guard looked at the unfamiliar object with surprise. After such a magnificent treat, the man said goodbye. He had to continue patrolling. But before leaving, he invited the young man to visit his town whenever he wanted. The captain of the knights said that he was glad to make a new acquaintance. Martin looked at the guard in surprise. He did not understand his status in this world. Finally, Francis warned the young man to be careful, as there were many dangers in these places, although the white wolf was his reliable guide, with whom there was no one to fear. Charlie woke up and demanded food again. The guard left, and only now did Martin realize that the knight had consumed alcohol on duty. Francis clutched the treasured jar tightly, hoping that he would meet his new acquaintance again. The main character gave the last portion to his shaggy friend, preparing to part. Martin recalled the moments of the meeting and the happy moments when the furry animal was nearby. It was time for the young man to return home, and he sadly packed his equipment. While Charlie was eating enthusiastically, the young man sighed and set off on his way back, not knowing if he would ever see the wolf cub again. The protagonist glanced out of the corner of his eye to see his friend licking the bowl, not paying any attention to him. Martin was sad to part with Charlie. The young man understood that the forest was the wolf's home, and mentally wished him luck. Looking back once more in farewell, the young cook did not see his furry friend. Martin was very upset. He wanted to look at the little descendant of the gods again. Hearing strange sounds behind him, the young man looked back. Charlie jumped on his friend's back and grabbed hold of his backpack tightly. The wolf cub growled and had no intention of hiding his claws. The main character was tired and couldn't tear the animal away from his travel bag. The baby didn't want to leave. He tenderly licked the hand of his new friend. Martin couldn't understand because the wolf cub wanted to go home. Why he wouldn't let him go now? Charlie looked into the eyes, as if saying that he was ready to go with the young man. The wolf cub did not give him a choice. Now he himself decided that he would live with the young man, who was happy about this. He had managed to become attached to his shaggy friend. It was time for the travelers to return to the village. The main character thought that now he would have to visit another world more often. Not far from his house, the main character saw a large number of people who were celebrating something. Several people were sitting on rugs. There was a lot of food everywhere. Others were singing and dancing to the music. Martin couldn't understand what all these strangers were doing near his house. The headman went to meet the young man. He was glad that the owner of the establishment had returned. Henry explained to the surprised boy that it was a village festive dinner. The main character didn't know about the event. No one warned him about it. The order was delivered right on time. It was a big sign with a greeting. The elder asked the upset boy to join the celebration. Only now did Martin realize that everything had been organized for him. The locals were happy that the young man had come to their village. The cook couldn't believe his eyes. There were strangers sitting at several tables, all of them happy to meet each other and wanting the restaurant to open sooner. Many have already heard about the young chef's magical cutlets. Adam and his wife watched with excitement as their friend was torn to pieces. The main character was very tired and wanted to go and rest. Grace said that in their small town, everyone knows each other, shares joys, and helps everyone. Henry confirmed the girl's words. He also believed that their strength lay in the friendship of people. The headman advised the young man to advertise the new restaurant. Martin couldn't believe that everyone there wished him well. People were chatting animatedly at the tables, and Grace brought some snacks. The old people interacted with the young people, sharing their memories. The main character watched what was happening with surprise. The young man noticed that his shaggy friend had suddenly disappeared. At this time, Charlie took advantage of the moment and actively destroyed the food. The cute, fluffy animal stole pieces of meat from the plates and ran away. Residents tried to catch the hooligan, who didn't even let them pet him. The tasty pieces instantly evaporated in the baby's mouth, and he ate only good quality products and without freezing. Martin watched the antics of his furry friend with shame, not admitting that it was his pet. The main character even had time to regret taking Charlie back home. Suddenly, the young man's gaze fell on a boy sitting alone nearby. The child was the only one at the party and looked very upset. Martin turned his attention to the baby. The grandmother approached her grandson and offered him a sandwich. The boy angrily snatched the food from the old woman's hands and threw it on the ground. The young man didn't like the behavior of the unfamiliar child at all. Henry approached the upset woman. He did not understand what had happened to Bob, why he was behaving so aggressively. It turned out that the boy had come from school, where his friend was enthusiastically talking about his trip to the city, where he walked with his parents and ate hamburgers. Martin listened attentively to the story of his grandmother, who tried to calm her grandson and bought him something similar in the store. Residents suggested looking for hamburgers in neighboring villages. It turned out that such products are sold only in specialized cafes in amusement parks. Henry listened to everyone and suggested that they try to cook the unfamiliar dish themselves. Nobody knew what a hamburger was, so the headman turned to a chef for help. The elder apologized. He had no one else to ask for help with food. Henry told Martin that the child didn't care about taste. He probably just wanted attention. The boy was jealous of his friend who was at the amusement park with his family. Bob's mother had been in the city hospital for several months, and his father was on a long business trip in another country, so he felt lonely. Martin knew this feeling. He sometimes felt sad alone too. The whole village took care of the boy, helping his grandmother. The young man could not sleep at night. It was not difficult to prepare hamburgers, although he himself had never tried them and did not know the real taste. Insatiable. Charlie has already prepared his bowl, ready for new experiments. The main character had no choice but to accept the challenge, especially since he had to pay the residents for the tricks of the furry beast, who left everyone at the festival without tasty meat. The baby's bottomless blue eyes glowed with joy. After a while, the juicy hamburger was ready. Charlie was ready to begin the audition. While his furry assistant was eating, Martin recalled his years of study. The main character came to the States with the goal of entering one of the most famous culinary educational institutions. The young man loved to cook since childhood and often developed various seasonings and even dishes on his own. The young man wondered if he could see himself from the recent past. Who doesn't know what he wants? Martin was dissatisfied with himself and moved on to the next portions. The kid was happy to help his friend. His plate was already empty. The main character remembered that taste always came first for him. Time flew by unnoticed. Morning came. The process was almost complete. Just the finishing touches needed to be added. The coveted hamburger was almost ready. Bob was already sitting at the table and waiting for a surprise. The boy was accompanied by his grandmother and the Lee family, and as soon as they entered, they could smell the subtle aromas of roast meat and warm buns. The child looked at the work of culinary art in fascination. Martin thanked him for waiting. The order was ready. The adults were amazed at how beautifully each layer was laid. Bob looked at the hamburger thoughtfully and didn't know which side to take it from. Finally, the boy made up his mind and brought the sandwich to his mouth. The child's eyes shone with surprise. The hamburger seemed 100 times better to him than the store-bought one. Bob thanked his grandmother for bringing him here. The elderly woman was glad that her grandson liked the treat. The boy stopped chewing and remembered his mother again. In fact, the child did not want a tasty dish, but to meet his sick mother, he hoped that if he asked for a hamburger, he would be taken to the city. The grandmother hugged the boy. She understood how hard it was for him alone. The child began to cry bitterly. He really missed his parents a lot. The main character promised Bob that when he went to the city, he would take him with him. The boy couldn't believe that this was possible. Grandma thanked Martin for his concern, and Grace asked the boy to take more photos when he was at the amusement park. The child was happy and began to look forward to the journey to his dream. The young man was pleased that he would be able to help the others. The next day, the young chef decided to conduct an audit of the remaining food products. There was enough food to go on a hike. Martin thought that he had never pitched a tent before, and when the restaurant opened, he would have no free time at all. The main character looked questioningly at his furry assistant. Charlie's tail moved vigorously from side to side, betraying his owner's thoughts. The young man tried to convince his shaggy friend that he was going on a regular hike and not to another world. After some time, the young cook was resting after the crossing and was thinking about how he began to visit the mysterious forest more often than the grocery store. It was time to unpack things and pitch the tent. The protagonist took out his equipment, happy that he had successfully found a beautiful place. It was completely quiet in the clearing in the forest. While Charlie was chasing butterflies, Martin was trying to put up the tent. The task turned out to be difficult. In all his years of life, the main character had never been on a campaign. Finally, the place to spend the night was ready. Setting up the tent turned out to be more difficult for the young man than he expected. Now it was necessary to prepare food. Hunger was already making itself felt. Some of the food had been prepared in advance, so lunch was ready quickly. Martin took out a plate of meat and added his signature sauce. Glad to have the opportunity to rest and eat, the protagonist calmly sat down in a chair. The little furry guests did not allow the young man to enjoy his solitude. The cook decided to share the remains of raw meat with the animals. The young man tossed the tasty morsels, trying to attract the attention of the long-eared guests. At that very second, a huge beak flashed in front of Martin's nose and grabbed the food. The giant bird soared into the sky, quickly leaving the frightened cook behind. Having calmed down a little, the young man shared his food with the little guests. After having a snack, the main character sat in a chair, watching the beautiful scenery. Previously, the young man thought that he would be bored in nature, but suddenly he felt how pleasant it was to relax in the forest. Martin continued his dinner, enjoying the silence around him. The young man did not immediately notice that he was being watched from the nearby bushes. Hearing a rustle, the protagonist looked back, hoping that it was Charlie who had returned, having run away into the forest again. The young man called his friend, showing him how much delicious food he had managed to prepare. A shaggy red paw with huge claws appeared from the thicket. The main character managed to react and remove the dish. An unfamiliar little animal jumped out into the clearing. Martin looked at the next guest with curiosity. An unknown creature stood in front of the young man. The half-beast or half-man looked like a wild cat, but it was clear that it was a child, most likely a girl. The werewolf was in an aggressive mood and growled, choosing the moment to attack. The main character saw such a creature for the first time, more like heroes from science fiction films. The tail was very similar to a cat's. Martin watched the uninvited guest with suspicion. The stranger's hands had skin with very short hair and sharp claws on her fingers. The cat chose the moment and attacked the man. The main character had to dodge again to avoid getting injured. The half-beast was upset and was preparing to jump again. The young man did not understand what was happening. His shaggy assistant ran away at the most crucial moment. Martin decided to talk to the guest, offering to do without bloodshed. Seeing the cat's gaze, the young man realized that she was hungry. The protagonist placed the plate of food on the ground, inviting the stranger to take the food and leave. The half-man carefully approached the delicious-smelling dish. The little werewolf looked closely at the food, which was emitting delicious aromas. The pieces of meat really looked very appetizing. The delicious smell from the baby's mouth made her drool. Martin watched as the uninvited guest grabbed the juicy piece with her teeth. The cat didn't have time to swallow the meat. A fiery fire was burning in her mouth. With tears in her eyes, the girl rolled on the grass, not knowing what to do. Martin remembered that he added hot sauce to the meat. After a while, the baby calmed down and licked her lips. The girl must have been very hungry because she approached the dish again. The cat began to carefully gnaw piece after piece. The protagonist thought that the stranger liked the food, despite its spiciness. The bushes rustled again and the sound of branches cracking was heard. A satisfied Charlie jumped out of the thicket into the clearing. The wolf cub watched in bewilderment as someone took his food. The fluffy lump rushed into battle, defending his plate. Martin tried to separate the fighting kids. The werewolf did not want to give in and growled. The main character did not know who to save. Both animals tried to attack each other. The boy lifted Charlie high, preventing the stranger from hurting him with her sharp claws. Suddenly, another half-beast appeared in the clearing and grabbed the girl by the clothes, preventing her from moving. The adult werewolf apologized to the man for the little girl's actions. A moment later, both beastmen vanished into thin air. Martin stood there in surprise. The next day, the main character returned home. The young man took up cleaning again. It was necessary to prepare for the opening of the restaurant. The main character thought, dreaming about starting work. A beautiful sign was already hanging above the entrance. The young chef summed up the results. The repairs were done, the food was prepared, everything was ready for the beginning of a new period of life. While Martin was thinking about the future, an old woman entered the restaurant. Despite the fact that the establishment was supposed to open the next day, the chef invited the visitor to the table. The elderly woman began to look around the room with curiosity. Grandma noticed that most of the furniture remained the same. With the change of owner, practically nothing has changed in the interior. Martin got into conversation with the guest. She remembered the times when there was a tea house in this place. The chef asked the lady to place an order. The woman agreed to try the dish that the young chef would prepare for her. She had no idea about European cuisine. The old woman did not make a choice, leaving it to the owner of the establishment. The young man went to the kitchen, realizing that his guest had most likely never eaten Italian food. Pasta with tomatoes was the most popular. Martin thought that it was sure to please the customer. After some time, the portion was ready. Martin wished his first customer bon appetit. He wanted to serve her perfectly. The cook was confident in himself. His pasta was always praised. He knew how to cook it very tasty. The woman only touched the food a couple of times. The main character was shocked. He could not understand why the guest did not like his food. There was a knock on the door. Someone was trying to see what was going on inside the restaurant. The headman went inside and really liked the sign. Henry greeted the old lady next door with surprise as she came out of the building. The elderly woman told the astonished old man that she had already eaten and gone outside. Martin stood over his full plate, upset. Henry didn't understand how so much food could be left behind. The main character was upset. He could not understand what his mistake was. The elder tried to calm the young cook, who was sitting in the corner, trying to figure out what he had done wrong. The young man realized that he was not at all ready to open a restaurant. Henry sat the guy down at the table and began asking him about what had happened. The elderly man convinced his friend that the old woman did not come to the restaurant for food. Barbara used to come here often with her husband. He was a regular at the tea house. Unfortunately, he died last year, and the woman was left alone. Henry said it wasn't Martin's fault that his client left without trying anything. However, the main character was upset, realizing that he was unable to interest the visitor. To analyze the situation and find a way out, the young man went to the treasured forest again, where he could admire the scenery and think calmly. Recently, no one had bothered him in the mysterious world. Martin felt sorry for the lonely old woman. The young man kept thinking about how to surprise Barbara since she refused his signature pasta. At the top, among the beautiful branches, sat the little cat again. The girl realized that she had been seen and became angry. The protagonist looked at the werewolf, realizing that she was hungry again. The young man demonstratively stood up from his chair and called Charlie to eat. The half-beast climbed down from the tree and carefully crept closer. In a few minutes, the juicy meat was ready. Martin cut the piece into pieces and poured the sauce over it. The camping stove was an excellent substitute for a campfire. The protagonist remembered the previous incident with the hot sauce, so he didn't add pepper. In addition to the meat, the chef prepared mushrooms in a creamy cheese sauce. The delicious dish was finally ready. The young man placed the plate in front of the growling guest. The cat remembered how spicy the food was last time and was no longer in a hurry to grab the pieces. The tailed girl carefully took the meat in her teeth. The baby felt like she was in heaven. It was the most delicious food she had ever tasted in her life. The cat meowed gratefully, happiness shining in her golden eyes. The half-beast began to quickly destroy the prepared food. Within moments, the plate was licked clean. Martin understood without words that the girl liked it. She was ready to eat the same amount again. The young chef thought about the fact that the food that was actually prepared was a bit fatty, and this dish was not suitable for everyone. The main character began to analyze his recipes, realizing that he needed to change a lot in his cooking. The cat noticed that they stopped paying attention to her and meowed invitingly, fawning over her new acquaintance. Martin was happy to talk and stroked the baby. The young man came to an important conclusion for himself that the main thing is the result. That is, the customer needs to like the dish. The girl listened attentively to the stranger. She was full and happy. Returning home, the main character took up the spring greenery. The young man decided to show the plants to his assistant. However, Charlie didn't even sniff it. He wasn't interested in the grass. Martin had to rely on his past experience, and besides, the wolf cub would not always be with him. He had to learn to cook again until his taste returned. The main character got down to business again. Now he understood how he could surprise Barbara. The headman approached the restaurant and read a notice that said the opening of the establishment was postponed. Henry realized that the chef was upset by the first failure and therefore postponed the deadline. The old woman sat alone in the courtyard of the house and enjoyed the sun's rays. The old man knocked and asked permission to enter. Barbara was very surprised to see her neighbor. The elder said that the cook was very upset when the old woman left a full plate of pasta. The grandmother said that she did not like the dish, but she did not understand how she upset the new owner of the restaurant. Henry asked the neighbor to give Martin another chance. Having thanked the woman for her conversation, the village elder went out for a walk again. Barbara was left alone again, pondering the words of her wise neighbor. The protagonist wiped the floor from his forehead. For the first time, he worked so hard on a new dish. The chef used vegetables and a little seafood to balance the flavors. The combination should be magnificent. Martin was pondering how to invite the old lady again when the sound of the bell was heard. The young man was not expecting guests and looked out of the kitchen in surprise. Barbara stood at the threshold waiting for permission to enter. The young man happily greeted the woman and sat her down at a laid table. The old woman was surprised that the food was already ready. The woman thought that she would see again the noodles that she didn't like the first time, already regretting that she had come. Suddenly, an unfamiliar, pleasant smell enveloped Barbara. The cook thanked us for waiting and put a plate on the table, saying that it was a special dish. Barbara looked at the fragrant paste with daylily in surprise. It was the first time she had heard of such a plant. The old lady decided to give it a try, and besides, she loved shellfish. The woman swallowed the first portion with pleasure and listened to her feelings. The taste of spring greenery reminded Barbara of her walks with her husband, who loved flowers very much. Grandma looked thoughtfully out the window. It was spring outside again. The elderly lady resumed her meal. Barbara called the cook over and thanked him, noting that this dish had never been on the menu before. Martin admitted that he only prepared food for his first client. The young man wanted to experiment and become better. The old lady finished everything and asked for the bill. The main character was glad that his dish was to his taste. He didn't want to take the money. Barbara insisted that the restaurant owner should be paid for his work and asked to add this product to the menu. When we parted, the old woman promised to drop by for lunch sometimes. Feeling relieved, Martin went on holiday to another world, now feeling he could handle the restaurant. The main character lay on a hammock. Remembering Barbara's kind words, the restaurant's first customer was pleased. A well-fed Charlie basked nearby. He was very sad if he was not in his world for several days. A giant bird flew past, covering half the sky with its body. Through his sunglasses, the young man saw a strange, huge cloud approaching. A frustrated Francis appeared from the thicket. The bird flew away, and he was left without lunch. The captain of the knights came out into the clearing and was surprised. His young friend's camp was in disarray, and the young man himself could not recover from his fear. The main character tried to get up after an unexpected visit from an uninvited guest. He was shaking all over. His glasses were broken. Not paying any attention to the mess and the guy's condition after meeting the bird, the man greeted him and approved of Martin's choice. The place to rest was chosen perfectly. The guard said that instead of patrolling today, he was hunting. Hearing the predator's cherished word, Charlie pricked up his ears. Francis was delighted. It was his time to feed his friends. But the main character was upset by the invitation to hunt. He didn't like killing animals. The knight did not ask his young friend's wishes and handed him a bow and arrows. While Martin was examining the unfamiliar weapon, the hunters found a pasture of local wild animals. Huge creatures, very similar to ostriches, frolicked in the clearing. The knight was glad. The meat of these strange beasts should be enough for several people. The two-legged birds seemed very cute from afar and resembled cotton candy. But in fact, instead of feathers, they had short fur. They were very strong and aggressive creatures and could run fast. Francis chose the moment to attack and rushed forward, the wolf cub keeping pace with the hunter. The main character was confused. He didn't know what to do. The knight shouted to the youth to support the attack from the rear, and Martin fired. The young man held a bow for the first time. Just a few minutes ago, the guard showed him how to handle the weapon. So the arrow almost hit the fluffy lump. Charlie managed to jump aside at the last moment. The cook was upset. He could easily hurt his friends. Evening had come. The sun had set behind the mountains, when the hunters had finished cutting up their prey. Francis roasted local ostrich meat over a fire. The main character's hand was still shaking, in fact. Pulling the bowstring turned out to be very difficult. The knight, joyful in anticipation of the meal, handed his guest a piece of meat. Martin didn't know what to do. The smell was simply unbearable. Even Charlie didn't try the treat. It was impolite to cover his nose, so the young man had difficulty bringing the resulting shashlik to his mouth. Even the lack of taste didn't help the protagonist feel how disgusting the piece smelled. Seeing that Francis was about to fry the next portion, the main character became indignant. The young man decided to try cooking meat himself. The only thing that bothered the main character was that he had never encountered local animals and did not know their characteristics. But he took the risk of trusting his experience. Martin wondered how he could quickly get rid of the smell of game and blood. There was only dark beer available, so the cook poured it into the pot. The knight watched with a distraught expression as the wonderful alcoholic drink was being used for something other than its intended purpose. The young man sent his older friend to make a device for the kettle. There were few spices and there was not enough bay leaf. Sensing the aromatic scents, a shaggy assistant appeared from the bushes. The chef mixed all the ingredients and left the meat to soak for an hour. Time flew by quickly. After the prey was extinguished on the fire, the wonderful smell spread throughout the area. Francis was ready to swallow the delicacy whole. However, it was still necessary to fry the delicious pieces over the fire. The meat was then cut into small pieces. The knight captain held the deliciously smelling dish in his hands and could not believe that this was the same game that he had caught today. None of the local chefs had managed to cook this beast so deliciously. Francis put the first portion in his mouth and froze in delight. The crust crunched between the teeth. The meat was tender and juicy. The guard couldn't believe it. For the first time in his life, he was enjoying food. The beer was a perfect match for the perfect dinner under the stars. The man was delighted, enjoying the food. Francis was ready to eat such delicious food every day. The main character was upset that he was unable to completely get rid of the smell. Usually this process took longer. The furry assistant actively wagged his tail, indicating that the experiment was a success. Charlie held out his empty plate in hopes of getting an extra helping, and Martin thought about taking more spices with him on his next trip for different occasions. Francis did not understand why his young friend was upset, because he cooked better than all the masters he knew. The captain of the knights thanked the young man for the magnificent dinner. The main character was glad that his dish was liked. The man dreamed of trying to cook meat at home on his own, using new techniques, while the well-fed wolf cub slept peacefully next to him. The guard tried to convince the boy that no one in his town could cook better than him. The protagonist listened to the praise with satisfaction, remembering the recent past. The young chef often heard the most flattering reviews about his culinary abilities from those around him and from professionals. Francis decided to thank his young friend and teach him how to wield a sword. Martin was shocked by the offer. He did not understand at all why he needed a weapon. The knight captain said that he is one of the best teachers and constantly works with young warriors. The protagonist's attempts to give up training were unsuccessful. The guard warned the young man that he would begin his studies the next time they met. The men drank to the decision they had made, and the cook had only to agree. He was given the task of taking beer and a tasty snack with him again. The other world was amazingly beautiful. Even the night sky glowed, reminiscent of the northern lights. The vacation was over. It was time to return to everyday concerns. The first week has passed since the restaurant opened. In the first days, there were many visitors, but then the flow subsided, and no one dropped in to visit the owner of the establishment. The main character didn't know what to do with himself out of boredom. Charlie spent all day watching TV. At that moment, a program about music was on. The live broadcast featured an interview with girls from a modern group called Dream, who performed youth songs and recently released a new album. The young man thought his friend was the main manager of this team. An old friend was very close at this time. Dennis and the girls were filming outdoors. The singers had some free time left. They were relaxing after a hard day at work. The young man decided to take advantage of the opportunity and visit his friend. Dennis dialed the familiar number and heard Martin's voice. The girls were bored and listened with curiosity to their leader's conversation. The manager made arrangements to visit a friend soon to chat and have dinner. Hearing the words about the chef and food, the beauties decided to follow Dennis. The girls' eyes were shining with curiosity. They really wanted to meet the mysterious chef. The young man gave instructions to his assistant to look after the musicians during his absence and take them home. The young man promised the boss that everything would be fine. Dennis knew the beauties' personalities, so he doubted that they wouldn't get into some kind of trouble. However, the girls behaved very obediently and said goodbye to the mentor. After the boss left, lead singer Alice insisted that their handler follow him. The inexperienced assistant manager tried to resist. He was determined to carry out the instructions of his senior colleague. The main character was not expecting guests and immediately started cleaning. Charlie listened attentively to his friend who said that he was going to cook again. There was a detective series on TV, and during surveillance on the highway, a group of pursuers was discovered. While Martin was pondering the menu, there was a knock at the door and a visitor entered. Dennis was not alone and was very angry. He had long noticed the assistant's car, which constantly followed him along the empty road. The restaurant owner listened attentively to his friend, not understanding what was happening. At this time, a group of musicians flew into the restaurant with delight, sharing their impressions of what they saw. They liked the coziness inside and the chef himself. The main character was a little upset. He specifically went to the wilderness to avoid meeting noisy companies. The girls looked at the fluffy puppy with curiosity, trying to pet it. The owner allocated a table for the unexpected guests. Dennis was very unhappy with the behavior of his charges, convincing them to leave the establishment. But suddenly, the chef's voice was heard. The main character suggested to his friend to feed the guests first. The manager was surprised by the offer. He had known for a long time that his old friend did not like surprises at all. Dennis thought, not long ago, Martin would have made a big scene if something hadn't gone according to plan. The young chef approached the girls to find out their preferences. When Dennis took the boy to this remote village, he thought that he had simply gone crazy from popularity and the peculiarities of celebrity life. The young man noticed that his friend had changed, and it was even surprising that he had a shaggy pet. The cook left the guests and went to work his magic in the kitchen. The main character wanted to cook something unusual and tasty. The chef wondered what ingredients he had. The professional refrigerator almost always contained some supplies. Having carried out the inspection, the young man was delighted. Now he knew how he would surprise his friend and his companions. After a few seconds, the work began to boil. The knife began to work as usual, slicing small tomatoes. The stove with frying pans was already waiting for its turn. Martin knew that it was always important for beauties that their meals were light and nutritious. Very soon, the delicious salad and steaks were ready. The members of the musical group saw such beauty for the first time. The pasta with signature sauce was a wonderful addition. The girls couldn't resist and pounced on the aromatic dinner with gusto. Alice was delighted with the pasta. She had never tasted such delicious pasta before. Another musician enjoyed a juicy piece of meat. Dennis watched his friend's behavior carefully. The girls were ready to cry from disappointment. They had never eaten so deliciously before. The manager was still angry about the group members' actions, and his friend suggested that he also have dinner with everyone. Even Dennis's assistant calmed down and ate his pasta with great pleasure, no longer regretting that he had not followed the boss's instructions. The main character prepared a special dish for his faithful companion so that he would have enough energy to get to the big city. The young man was frightened, thinking that his friend was behaving unusually because he was terminally ill, but his assumption turned out to be wrong. After an unusually delicious dinner, the guests said goodbye to the restaurant owner. Martin invited everyone to come again and promised to prepare dishes that would be even better next time. Alice thanked the cook on behalf of everyone. She had managed to find his information on the internet. The protagonist was surprised that his name was still known. The assistant manager put the beauties in the car. It was time to go home. They promised to definitely come to visit. Dennis shared a secret. The girls often watched the chef's videos with cooking secrets. It was time for the young man to go to the city too. The road was long. The main character was glad of the unexpected meeting, but asked to inform about the visit in advance next time. Before leaving, Dennis inquired about his friend's health. Martin looked rested and even happy. The guests left. Little Charlie settled peacefully back into his chair in front of the TV and fell asleep after a restless evening. The next morning, the protagonist went to the supermarket to replenish his food supplies. The nearest store was at the other end of the village. The rest were in small neighboring towns. Martin needed some spring greens, and last time he bought them here. The young man entered the spacious hall and said hello. There were practically no customers. The main character noticed the young saleswoman. He saw her here for the first time. The girl modestly responded to the stranger and offered help. The young chef refused. He knew what he wanted. Unfortunately, the daylily that old Barbara loved was not there. The upset young man said goodbye and left the store. He really didn't want to go to the city to buy the necessary greens. The young man heard children's voices and looked in the direction from which the noise was coming. The boy and the girl grabbed each other by the hair and didn't want to let go. The little girl screamed that she would not play with the liar anymore. The guy also refused to be friends with a foreigner, sending his rival, who was not like the locals, to the country from which she came with her mother. The couple stood opposite each other, neither of them wanting to give in. The main character approached the fighters and unclasped their hands. Martin scolded the boy for the words he had unfairly spoken about the girl. Hearing screams in the street, a saleswoman came out of the supermarket. The girl saw her daughter among a group of children. The little girl ran to her mother with tears in her eyes. The store worker hugged the child and asked her what had happened. The young man let the boy go, and now his enemy had his own protector. The little offender ran away, afraid that he would be punished. The stranger's name was Zheng. She thanked the main character for helping the girl. Martin told the girl that he had not done anything special. The young man inquired about the condition of the girl, who was very upset. Little Kara had already calmed down and fallen asleep. The supermarket saleswoman told her interlocutor that the conflict occurred because of her. The cook tried to convince the girl that this was a normal children's quarrel. The foreigner said that she recently moved with her child to a small village from distant Vietnam and has not yet gotten used to the local customs. Zhang felt like her daughter was constantly being laughed at. At school, children often made fun of Kara. The main character did not know how to calm his interlocutor. Her words were true. Martin remembered the boy angrily shouting at the little girl that she was not like the others and sending her back to where she came from. The young man understood that the child could have said such words simply out of anger, in order to unfairly offend another. Zhang calmed down a little. She remembered that she had heard about a young man who had a restaurant on the other side of the village, and was glad to meet him, the Vietnamese woman asked, to teach her how to cook local dishes. The main character was very surprised by the request. The saleswoman said that Kara had a birthday soon, and she wanted to invite her friends to the party, so the girl needed to prepare some treats for everyone. Martin promised to help and said goodbye. In the evening, he thought about what he could offer his new acquaintance. The young man could not refuse, but he did not like the idea of a beauty. The young man did not know what dishes would interest the little guests. The main character understood that the girl was wrong. She just wanted to please her daughter and her friends. The cook was distracted from his thoughts by a fluffy Charlie. The kid came for help. He brought some canned food so that his older friend could open it. The young chef thought about how his pet always ran to him when he was hungry. The baby's behavior gave the protagonist the idea that he needed to ask for help if necessary. The young man thought about his neighbors who could suggest the right solution. Taking a small gift, the restaurant owner went to the Lee couple. The cook decided that the family knew all the local peculiarities and customs. Grace was very surprised by the unexpected guest. Old man Henry also went to see his neighbors to chat and drink some water. The village elder was outraged that the cook did not turn to him for advice. He should be aware of all the events. The young man told his friends about the children's fight and the Vietnamese woman's request to prepare national dishes. Grace remembered Kara. The girl often walked with Bob after classes. The young man listened attentively to the farmer's wife. Adam said that there is only one school in the village, so all children of different ages study in a combined class. Martin learned that there were 20 students in total. Of course, they knew each other well. The young man understood that every parent is ready to do everything to make their child happy. Henry intervened in the conversation. He was categorically against the idea of local dishes. The headman asked the young man to convince Jang to make some foreign dishes. The old man was sure that the children would not be able to appreciate Kara's mother's actions due to their age, so there was no need to try in vain. The elderly man suggested showing the young guests that there are different nations, and that differences in food should not be a problem for communication. The main character thought about it. He was amazed by Henry's wisdom. The next day, the young man went to visit his new acquaintance. Zhang listened to the advice. She doubted that cooking Vietnamese food would be a good idea. The cuisines were very different from each other. The girl was worried that the little guests would not like the food. Martin offered to discuss a menu that would be interesting for children and help with the cooking. The new acquaintance was surprised. She also needed support. There was little time left before the holiday, and the friends got to work. The chef suggested choosing dumplings, nems, and rice noodles. After a few hours, the experiment was over. The dishes looked original and very appetizing. The chef agreed to try the food. The young man especially liked the buncha, so he suggested including it in the holiday menu. The young man tried this dish for the first time, and thanks to the special sauce, the food seemed especially tasty. Martin advised the girl to leave the choice of the main diet to this product. While Yang went to get some water, Charlie came to his friend's aid. The young cook watched the shaggy pet's reaction with curiosity. The tail movements indicated that the prepared dish was excellent. The main character advised the girl not to add pepper and reduce the amount of other spices, since this is food for children. Zhang also agreed that a little beef could be added to the pork to make the patties more tender. The young man was sure that the little guests would really like this dish. The Vietnamese woman thanked the young man for his help. The main character went home with relief. He was glad that he managed to convince the girl to use her national cuisine. Before Martin had taken a few steps, he heard a child's voice. Kara hurried to catch up with the guest. She also wanted to thank him. The little girl was glad that the young man agreed to help her mother. In her hands, the girl held an invitation to her birthday, which she had drawn herself. The main character praised the child for the beautiful design. Kara didn't believe that anyone would come to visit her, even though she handed out cards to the entire class because she had a fight with a bully who was friends with all the kids in the school. The restaurant owner saw the girl's sad look and tried to calm the little girl down. The young man knew who could help him organize the children. The day of the party arrived, and in anticipation of the guests, Yang and her daughter decorated the house festively. The little girl thought that only 2 people would come to visit her, the cook and her friend Bob. Kara was very nervous. It was her first birthday in another country. The girl stood thoughtfully at the door, waiting for the invited children. Zhang decided to distract her daughter from her disturbing thoughts and called out to her. The girl saw for the first time a beautiful, unusual outfit that her mother wore to a party. After learning that this was a traditional Vietnamese garment, Kara wanted one too. The girl's joy knew no bounds when her mother gave her a festive outfit. There was a knock at the door, and the little girl tensed up again. Zhang suggested that her daughter meet the guests together. The girl went to open the door, happy that someone had come. Opening the door, the little girl was confused when she saw the first visitor. Kara didn't know what to say. She wasn't ready for the meeting. The girl's recent offender stood at the entrance with a guilty look. The beauty asked Kevin why he came. She did not invite him to her party. The boy asked for forgiveness. He repented of having offended his classmate. Kevin couldn't take it anymore and started crying. He really wanted to be friends with the new student. Kara was confused. She was surprised by the guy's words. The main condition of the party was to have an invitation, so the girl forgave her friend and brought him the treasured postcard. The boy couldn't believe it. Tears were rolling down his eyes. Kevin promised to never hurt the girl again. Kara ceremoniously presented her classmate with an invitation to his birthday party. The boy looked at the beautifully designed pass to the banquet. The guy was happy and thanked his girlfriend. It turned out that all the other guests were standing behind the gate and impatiently waiting for their classmates to make peace. The rest of the school children supported Kara and advised their friend not to bully the girl from another country anymore. The whole class was happily waving invitations. It was time to start the party. The little girl was happy with the guests and gifts. The table was set. The aroma filled the whole house. The children looked at the unfamiliar dishes with delight and surprise. The main character was already there and helping Jang. He was also happy that all his classmates had gathered together. The hostess happily told us the names of different products and how to eat them. The little guests tasted the food unknown to them with gusto. The Vietnamese dumplings looked unusual and the children also liked them. After having a snack, the classmates began to share news. Bob was very interested in the birthday girl's beautiful dress. Kara said that this outfit is from her home country. Jang supported her daughter, confirming that all the food is also from Vietnam. The girl asked her mother to tell everyone about the customs of their country. The main character convinced Jang to come out to the guests. Almost all the food was already ready. He himself could handle the small work in the kitchen. The happy birthday girl pulled her mother towards her friends to get to know them better. Martin watched his new acquaintances carefully. He was pleased that everything worked out for them. The girl and her daughter showed off their national clothes to the guests. The children really liked the beauties' dresses. In another world, it was morning in the village of Beastmen. The tribal leader could not find her disobedient daughter again. Guard Liam reported to Samantha that the child was still able to escape despite the increased number of guards. The leader was sure that little Luna had gone again to see the strange man who had been appearing frequently in the local forests lately. The chief was curious about who could interest the sacred wolf and her disobedient daughter, so she asked her assistant to invite the stranger to visit. Liam was shocked by the tribe leader's decision. Samantha knew that there were no laws prohibiting people from visiting the village. The main cat hoped that none of her subordinates would attack the person or harm him. Unsuspectingly, Martin went back to the fairy tale world for rehabilitation. The shaggy assistant's menacing growl surprised the young man greatly. Charlie looked with fear at the unknown products that the cook took with him this time. The main character was surprised by the wolf cub's reaction when he saw arthropod crustaceans for the first time. The furry friend usually easily dealt with large predators and scary monsters from the local forest. Today, the chef decided to treat the baby to seafood. The young cook began to prepare the food. First, he had to peel the shrimp. The main character prepared a frying pan and poured salt into it. A few moments later, the crustaceans were neatly laid out and it was time to start cooking. Martin put the dishes on the fire and sat down to rest. Only now did the young man notice that little Luna was already nearby and patiently waiting for a treat. The young man was surprised. He didn't hear the cat come to the camp, but he promised to let him try the new product. After a few minutes, the shrimps were ready. They acquired a nice color and looked very appetizing. The chef cleaned the seafood and placed it on plates for his tailed friends, who curiously examined the unfamiliar food. Having risked taking a bite, each of the shaggy animals felt like a conqueror of the ocean, carried on the waves of an extraordinary taste. The main character watched the reaction of the furry babies with curiosity. Luna and Charlie ate the new delicacy with pleasure. The cook was pleased that his dish was liked. The tailed girl eagerly awaited more. As always, Liam appeared suddenly and silently. The cat was scared. She didn't want to go back home with her bodyguard. The little girl hid behind the legs of her new friend, listening to the indignant words of her mother's assistant. The giant looked at the stranger whom little Luna had trusted. The main character tried to protect the baby. She was hungry. Martin told the unexpected guest that he does not feed the girl unhealthy foods. However, today Liam arrived for the young man. The young man was frightened, not understanding why the strange beastmen needed him. The bodyguard told the boy that he had been invited to the village by the chieftain. Liam added that the head of the tribe is also the mother of the disobedient kitten. The cook was surprised that Luna was the daughter of an important person. The young chef was afraid that they would start asking him about what he had treated the child to, so he decided to refuse the meeting, citing his extreme busyness. Samantha's assistant handed the stranger a tribal warrior horn. Liam warned that once the young man decided to accept the invitation, he could use this item to call the Beastmen. The half-human was very polite and behaved correctly. Martin could not understand why he should meet the chief, but he promised to think about it and report his decision. The cook had absolutely no desire to meet Luna's angry relatives. The main character could not at all imagine what a half-beast village looked like. Liam said goodbye and was about to leave when the cook called out to him. The young man could not let the guest go without a treat. The chief's assistant looked into the package that the man handed him. Strange creatures lay inside, emitting a delicious aroma. Arriving home, Liam took a chance to taste the gift. Luna's bodyguard was pleasantly surprised and really enjoyed the treat. Left alone with the furry babies, Martin sighed with relief. While the shaggy friends fought for more, the main character wondered whether he should accept the strange invitation. The cook thought that if Charlie was acting calmly, then there was no threat. Despite his curiosity, he had no desire to visit the village. As if he had smelled delicious food, Francis appeared. The young man was delighted. He just needed the guard's advice. The night captain was surprised to learn that his young friend was expected in the tribe. The man said that for a long time there was no connection between people and half-animals. Not a single person was in their village. It was even surprising that these creatures calmly left the baby with the guy. They had adopted social principles of education. Francis looked at the cook, not understanding what was special about him. The captain of the knights convinced the young man that no one could harm him in a foreign world, so he could safely go visit. Martin calmed down and decided to take advantage of the invitation in a few days. It was time to treat the guard with an unknown product. The young man had specially saved an extra portion of shrimp for him. As the seafood was being cooked, the smell spread throughout the forest. Francis watched with curiosity as the crustaceans changed color in the pan. The shaggy little creatures again waiting for more. The dish looked gorgeous. The slice of lemon completed the look. The young man showed the guest how to extract the tender meat of the krill from its hard shell. The captain of the knights looked at the miracle in amazement, not understanding where his young friend was bringing unknown products from. The man carefully placed the first piece into his mouth. Then something incredible happened. Francis seemed to be rocking on the waves, tasting the gifts of the sea. The guard had never tried anything like this. At this time, the main character was separating the tailed babies, who were fighting again over tasty food. The knight commander got tired of cleaning the shrimp and swallowed it whole. The shaggy friends also got tired of waiting and ate the seafood along with the shell. Martin watched his comrades with surprise. The well-fed babies with full bellies could not move and lay down to sleep. In gratitude for the tasty treat, Francis was going to give himself completely to the upcoming training. The young man had already forgotten that he had been promised to be taught how to wield a sword. The knight promised to start with simple exercises. By the evening, after a 4-hour run, the main character's entire body was shaking. Every muscle ached. The guard did not expect that his student would be weak and would not be able to withstand small physical exertion. Charlie felt sorry for his friend and licked the calluses on his feet and the abrasions on his body. Martin felt the pain subside at the touch of the little tongue. It turned out that the saliva of the sacred animal was healing. Luna looked at the wolf cub and also tried to help her new acquaintance. The young man thanked the girl, but she had no healing properties. Admiring the cook's determination, Francis took out the gift. The teacher made a special surprise for the young man. The main character barely got to his feet and looked at the sword with fear. However, the weapon turned out to be much lighter than usual and was made of durable wood. Several years ago, the guard himself made a blade for his daughter, but she refused to train. Now the man is going to teach everything he knows to his young friend. It was only late in the evening that Martin was able to get home. The young cook quickly prepared dinner, dreaming of going to bed as soon as possible. For the first time in several months, the young man wanted to eat at night. The shaggy assistant also got his share. The main character was glad that he added a little bacon and garlic to the pasta. The taste turned out to be much richer. The kid quickly devoured the food and waited for more, watching his older friend freeze in shock. Only now the cook realized that he had felt a faint taste of the prepared food. He began to try everything in a row, making sure that his abilities began to gradually recover. The main character couldn't believe his luck. The four-legged assistant watched the cook closely. The young man thought that if he had not gone to a distant village, he would have given up his favorite activity long ago. Martin dreamed of being able to cook the way he wanted again. At night, the headman was returning home from his friend. The friends had been drinking, so now Henry was walking and humming a song cheerfully. The elderly man was surprised to notice a light in the restaurant windows late at night. The main character forgot about the pain in his body. He decided to arrange a holiday for himself and Charlie. The contented baby was eagerly awaiting the treat. There was something unusual in the oven, spreading smells throughout the house. For the first time since escaping civilization, Martin decided to cook his signature dish. The young man could not yet fully taste all the subtleties of food, but he was glad even for this. The bar had a supply of wine to celebrate his first successes. Charlie barked to attract the cook's attention. The kid tried to say that the dish turned out great. The main character was glad that he came to the village. Morning came, the owner of the restaurant decided to take a day off. A loud knock on the door interrupted Martin's sleep. The sleepy young man, not understanding anything, looked at the uninvited guest. The headman tried to wake up his neighbor with loud shouts. Henry wanted the boy to follow him. The wolf cub that came out of the bedroom didn't understand anything either. Charlie managed to notice that the old man was dragging his friend into the car. A few seconds later, the car sped off in an unknown direction. The wolf cub stood near the open door in bewilderment. Arriving at the hospital, the elder parked the car and ran to the emergency room, Martin barely keeping up with him. The corridor was already crowded with numerous villagers. Henry told the boy that Grace had been taken to the maternity hospital that night. Adam was the most nervous of all. He was very worried about his wife. Barbara looked at her excited neighbors and decided to tidy up the emergency room. The old woman kicked everyone out into the street so that people wouldn't distract the doctors from their work with their screams. The old woman looked at the boy and asked him to stay with the farmer to support the future father of the Lee family. The young man felt unwell after the night's feast and tried to refuse. The main character sat quietly next to his friend. The young man was in such a situation for the first time and did not know what to say. Martin carefully placed his hand on his comrade's shoulder. Adam was very worried. He was worried about the health of his wife and unborn child. The cook calmly assured the man that everything would be fine, Grace would cope, and would soon give birth. A few minutes later, the happy father ran out into the yard. He had a baby girl. The villagers were very happy and gathered to celebrate the momentous event. Taking advantage of the opportunity, the main character asked Henry for advice on what would be best to take with him if he had an invitation to visit friends. At first, the headman was afraid that the neighboring villages wanted to take the young man away from them. Then he calmed down and thought about it. Martin was not surprised to hear that drinks were always the main gift. The elderly man also suggested that they take some snacks with them. The protagonist thanked the elder for the advice. A couple of days later, having collected the bare necessities, the young man again set off to another world. It was scary to blow the horn. A strange sound awakened the forest thicket. The signal was heard not only from above but also underground. The animals became alarmed when they heard the unusual melody. It turned out that blowing the horn is quite difficult. However, after a few seconds, Liam and Luna were already next to the guest. The assistant to the chieftain of the Beastmen was glad that Martin found the time to respond to the invitation. He did not hesitate and hoisted the boy onto his powerful shoulder. The main character was not prepared for the journey upside down. A moment later, Liam made a huge leap and shot upward. The main character felt sick from the surprise and the height, and the bodyguard was surprised that people had become so defenseless that they could not endure the simplest jump over a distance. The young man remembered the words of Francis, who also spoke about the boy's poor preparation. Martin was delighted when his companion suggested that they continue on foot. A few minutes later, Liam reported that they had arrived at the location. The main character was surprised. It was the first time he had been in such an unusual place. The small village looked cozy. The houses resembled yurts. The chieftain's assistant was amazed that such structures also existed in their guest's world. Liam invited his guest to continue on his way. Martin suddenly remembered Francis's words, who said that it was safe to visit the half-beast village. They revered the sacred white wolves, one of which was now nearby. During their last meeting, the captain of the knights told his young friend about the ancient treaty. Many centuries ago, a war raged between different races in this world. The tribes fought each other for hundreds of years. Mountains of corpses lay everywhere. Suffering and death were everywhere. If the war had continued, the end of the world would have come. But higher powers intervened in the affairs of mortals. A treaty was concluded between the races to prevent further conflicts. Gradually, the peoples and tribes separated from each other and stopped communicating altogether. As he got closer to the village, the protagonist began to worry whether the Beastmen would accept him. The young man walked between the houses, surrounded on all sides by appraising glances. A small group blocked the guest's path. The old werewolf looked in surprise at the man their leader had invited. Martin felt a wave of hostility coming from the stranger. However, Liam reminded Harley, who turned out to be the local warlord, that the young man was a guest of the tribe. The old man was unhappy. He did not like the presence of a man in the village. The half-human's gazes met, Liam's voice firm as he offered to give way, as he was following the chieftain's instructions. Suddenly, the white wolf cub growled. He didn't like the behavior of the local commander. The villagers were shocked to see the sacred beast in a rage. Martin didn't understand what had happened and tried to calm his shaggy friend. Unexpectedly, Luna stood up to defend the guest and also bared her fangs at Harley. The protagonist said that he came only because he was invited and did not have any devious thoughts. No one immediately noticed the movement from above. Samantha did not wait for the man and hurried to meet him. The leader of the half-beast tribe greeted the stranger. Liam advised Martin to show respect for the high rank. The leader of the half-human race was very charming. The main character bowed, thanking for the invitation. Luna was glad to see her mother. The baby got bored and immediately climbed into my arms. Samantha said that first of all she wants to apologize for her child, who caused additional trouble for the person. The voivode was surprised. He could not understand why his leader was asking for forgiveness from a stranger. The chieftain pretended to have just recognized her subordinate, who was trying to break the ancient treaty and attack the man. Samantha said, with a smile, that she was confident in the warlord. He was a smart member of the tribe and could not harm people. The old warrior was afraid to go into conflict. He confirmed the words of the village head that he did not intend to harm the guest. The leader of the half-beasts invited the main character to the local palace. She was embarrassed that the residents did not greet him very hospitably. Martin constantly felt numerous glances on himself. It seemed to him that they were ready to tear him into pieces. Samantha said that she really wanted to meet the man who was able to tame the sacred wolf and her daughter. The young cook refused to express gratitude for caring for Luna. He simply treated her to his dishes. The young man remembered that he had prepared for the meeting and brought gifts. The protagonist reached into his backpack and pulled out a small container of food, the smell of which had already spread throughout the entire tent and attracted attention. The chief saw the delicious pieces of pork and was surprised by the guest's modesty. In addition to meat, the head of the tribe received an alcoholic drink that definitely could not exist in another world. Having heard that the container could explode due to the shaking on the way, the guards were ready to pounce on the man. The neck of the bottle flew off, and a stream of sparkling wine flew upward like a salute. Only now did the guards understand what the guest was talking about. He turned out to be safe for their leader. Samantha didn't wait for the whole drink to fly out and decided to taste it. The owner of the settlement was surprised. The wine turned out to be delicious. The girl wanted to try the treat that Martin had prepared. The chief carefully took out a piece of fried pork with spices. The fluffy beauty enjoyed it. There was no game smell at all. The meat was tender and juicy. The bodyguards released the man and were forced to apologize to him. He really did not wish anyone harm. Liam was pleased that his fellow tribesmen recognized the guest. He was already ready to stand up for him. Charlie also growled, warning of his hostile intentions. After a tasty snack, Samantha suggested throwing a feast for the entire village, with the one who caught the tastiest game becoming the chieftain of all the hunters. The main character's eardrums were ready to burst from the enthusiastic screams and loud growls. The tribesmen loudly expressed their joy at the chief's idea. While the villagers went hunting, their leader looked after the children and told the guest about local customs. The tailed babies ran tirelessly across the lawn. Samantha loved to stalk prey herself, but today she was forced to deal with the little cubs. The tribe had a public education for the younger generation, so there was always an adult with them. One animal became interested in the delicious smell and grabbed the main character's trouser leg, trying to test the strength of the fabric with its teeth. Martin tried desperately to save his clothes. The tailed baby clung tightly to the material. It was impossible to tear him away from the man. Finally, the young man managed to free himself from the sharp fangs of the curious child. There was a crash, and the body of a terrible monster from the wild forest fell in front of the cook. The satisfied commander was the first to bring his spoils. Samantha told the guest that this monster is difficult to catch because of its enormous speed of movement, despite its large mass. Harley lived up to his title. He was considered an experienced hunter for good reason. The main character pretended to highly appreciate the merits of the commander in the first game. However, Samantha did not support Martin. She was unhappy with the fact that the leader of the warriors constantly brought back ugly and disgusting animals from the hunt. The next prey that was brought to the main tent was an even more powerful and terrible monster. A proud Charlie, looking like a hero, dragged by the tail a mythical snake-like beast whose venom had paralytic properties. The commander was dissatisfied. The members of his squad alone would not be able to defeat the monster. Harley barely contained his emotions so as not to growl and tear his competitor apart. Even little Luna returned from hunting, purring happily with pleasure. The little cat's gaze fell upon the dead animals, which she had never seen before, and she modestly placed her prey in the common pile. The villagers returned from the forest. It was time to sum up the results, and Samantha announced the name of the winner. The warrior who earned the title of leader of the hunters was a teenager with a multicolored bird in his paws. The young resident, who looked more like a small cat, was more amazed by the result than anyone else. Harley was disappointed. He did not understand why the honorary title did not go to him, but the conditions of the competition stated that the winner would be the one who brought not the largest animal, but the tasty game. The governor could not believe that he had lost to a child. The leader explained her idea. The chieftain must choose the right prey to feed the tribe. No one dared to challenge the leader's decision. and she ordered the fire to be lit. It was time to start cooking the meat and begin the feast. Everyone supported the leader, only little Sasha was sad. She understood that she would not be able to lead the adult hunters. The protagonist was secretly glad that it wasn't Charlie who won. It was unknown how the visit to the Beastmen settlement could have ended. Lucas decided to have a bite to eat and head home. Game was roasting on several fires. The supply of meat and blood was unbearable. The young cook was surprised that spices were not used at all in the village. Even little Luna refused to eat the cooked meat. The wolf cub could not breathe from the stench that enveloped the entire settlement of half-beasts. The main character tried to contain his emotions, but he couldn't take the knuckle in his mouth and decided to try to cook the game himself. The young man took out the cutlery that he always took with him on picnics. The meat was cut into small pieces and placed on a hot baking sheet until a crispy crust formed. Then the cook took out a cauldron and poured alcohol into it. At this time, the shaggy assistant returned, who had gone into the forest for sour fruits. Everyone was waiting impatiently for the meat to soak in the strange marinade. After half an hour, aromatic smells began to emerge from the pan. Martin took the product out of the container with alcohol and was afraid to inhale it. However, the stench disappeared, and the main character continued to cut the meat into thin pieces. Samantha was the first to risk trying it, and it worked. The leader was surprised by her impressions, not believing that this was the game they had caught. But the young man was dissatisfied with the result and wanted to try to cook the catch again. The leader and her charges began to wait for a new portion of meat. Mother Moon liked the man. He was calm and behaved bravely, but he was a guest, and she wanted him to rest too. Martin was surprised when the village mistress ordered the villagers to repeat the boy's experience, take alcohol and fruit to soak and cook the meat. Samantha thanked the young man for the lesson. The tribe itself had to prepare the game that they caught during the hunt. The Beastmen approached the cook for advice. He told them what fruits would be best and how long it would take for the smell of blood to disappear. The well-fed Moon did not leave her mother, who was glad to have met a human. The day flew by unnoticed. Evening came. It was time for the main character and his assistant to return home. Samantha thanked him for the lessons on behalf of all the tribe members. Liam had to take his new friends to the clearing where their campsite was usually located. As a parting gift, the leader gave Martin a small gift. The young man thanked the leader. The whistle was proof of friendship with the Beastmen and could be used to call them for help. As he fell asleep, the main character thought that he would never forget this day. A strange man appeared in the restaurant in the morning. The owner of the establishment watched in surprise as the man tried to hide his appearance behind dark glasses and a hat. The young chef brought the menu and was ready to take orders. The stranger could not believe that he had found himself in a real restaurant in a remote place. The man wanted spaghetti vongole to be cooked for him. Martin met for the first time in the village a man who understood Italian cuisine and offered him linguine, which was only slightly different from the dish he had ordered. The stranger was at a loss from surprise and was satisfied with the replacement. The man still couldn't believe that the owner of the establishment was familiar with pasta. The young man received the order and went to the kitchen. The young man understood that the guest was knowledgeable about European food products and knew exactly what he wanted. Linguine is denser than regular spaghetti and is usually served with seafood. Martin was glad to have met a connoisseur of Italian cuisine. He had not had a chance to show what he was capable of for a long time. After some time, the order was displayed on a plate in front of the visitor. The stranger was shocked. The smell was very aromatic. All that was left was to try the prepared food to taste. The man slowly brought the paste to his mouth. After trying the first portion, Mr. George appreciated the dish. Despite the presence of shellfish, the smell of fish was absent, and there was just enough spice to emphasize the taste. The visitor was surprised again. Not every restaurant in the city could boast of such quality. The man put down his cutlery and thought. The main character heard his name being called and turned away from the TV in time. On the screen was the same person who was now sitting at the table next to him. He was a famous artist who left his mark on the history of world art. The owner of the establishment only saw that the strange man had completely hidden his head in his cloak. He thought that his dish was not liked. However, the stranger thanked him for the quality of the preparation and was about to leave. The protagonist told the guest that he was the first visitor who knew a lot about Italian dishes. Martin learned that the man had become familiar with European cuisine in his youth when he was studying abroad. The cook invited the strange man to come more often. He could cook any dish. George asked if he could make a vegetable soup with pasta called minestrone, which the whole family usually ate. The chef was ready to fulfill the order within half an hour. The man promised to drop by the next day and went outside. The famous artist was glad that he visited the restaurant. Before leaving, the stranger met the owner and called him a real master. He was looking forward to tomorrow. The name of the famous artist was known to almost everyone. Martin was surprised when the guest introduced himself. The main character returned to the TV, where the program about the star visitor continued. The next day, Charlie was sleeping peacefully in the yard when he heard the delighted cries of his two-legged friend. The main character enthusiastically greeted the famous artist who came in for lunch. Mr. George was modest. He did not want to be recognized by others at all. The elderly man simply dropped in to enjoy some good food and reminisce about his youth. The young chef brought minestrone and wished him bon appetit. The aromatic smell of soup spread throughout the room. The man took the spoon and thought again. Martin watched the visitor's reaction with slight fear. George said that he had only eaten such a dish in Italy. The taste was real, but his look was sad. The man remembered the distant years when he went abroad to study in pursuit of his dream. The student did not have enough money, so he tried to do any work to buy brushes and paints. The young artist was forced to eat only pasta. When the young man managed to sell his painting, he would throw a party and go to the same small restaurant. At that time, a plate of vegetable soup was a treasure for him, which he could order from a formidable silent waitress. After some time, the aspiring artist received a lucrative offer and left the country, and from then on, he avoided Italian cuisine. Many years later, the famous artist realized that his past memories were dear to him, so he wanted to taste that cheap minestrone again. Martin listened with interest to the visitor's story. The man was a little upset. Now the taste of the soup seemed completely different to him. The young man was also upset. He wished his interlocutor success in searching for a past feeling. The young man remembered how difficult it was for him to survive in another country when he left to study, dreaming of becoming an outstanding chef. George thanked the guy who listened to him and got ready to leave. The young chef asked to tell what the dish looked like, its smell and features. He really wanted to help the guest. The man noted that the soup was less tasty, but the broth was thicker, the vegetables were the cheapest, and it had a fishy taste since the town was located on the coast, and everything there smelled of seafood. Martin thought about it and invited George to come see him the next day. The little helper licked his lips with pleasure, preparing to try the food. In the evening, the protagonist once again analyzed the words of the famous artist. The ingredients of the soup changed depending on where and who prepared it. The fishy taste indicated that it could have been kakuko soup with seafood. The cook thought that his visitor was well versed in the dishes and could not confuse the names. The young man continued searching the internet for information that could help him. The young man decided to find information about the place where the aspiring painter lived. The Italian city of Amalfi was the ancient capital of a maritime republic and was located in a beautiful place at the mouth of a deep gorge, surrounded by picturesque cliffs and coastal landscapes. The cook looked at the beautiful resort places with admiration. Gradually, Martin figured it all out and was ready to try again to make the soup that the famous guest had recalled. The young cook started working early in the morning. Closer to lunchtime, a bell rang, warning of a visitor. The main character has been waiting for Mr. George for a long time. The young chef invited the guest to sit at the table. The artist also did not waste time and found information about a local chef who recently became the youngest winner of several culinary shows. Martin brought out a tray from the kitchen with a small saucepan covered with a lid. Now the man knew where the brilliant chef came from in the distant village. George didn't expect results. He thanked the guy in advance for listening to him. Just the attention of a stranger was enough for him. The young man understood the mood of the guest, who had visited many establishments in pursuit of that very taste of youth. No one had tried to do anything for the visitor, so Martin now prepared to lift the lid with satisfaction. The famous artist perked up. He smelled a familiar fishy smell. Today the minestrone looked completely different. The broth was foaming. It was hard to imagine that the two different soups were prepared by the same person. Despite the fact that the dish looked disgusting, the man dared to take a spoon. After trying the first portion, George froze. The visitor thought that if he tried this soup for the first time now, he would immediately pour it out. But in the old days, this was his dream. The cherished taste of youth once again stirred up memories. A small room with a view of the sea, a breath of wind and the smell of paints flashed through the artist's head. The guest sat motionless for several minutes, reliving moments from his past life. The man was happy. He no longer believed that he would ever meet his dream again. However, it was impossible to eat this soup now. Martin explained how much time it took him to figure out what was going on. At first, the cook tried to make a caciuco broth, but even its taste did not have a strong smell. Then the young man began to work on the composition of the dish, guessing that seafood was chopped into ordinary minestrone. George couldn't believe it. The restaurant chef couldn't make such a soup? It was hard to believe that he wanted to make fun of the customers. The young man suggested that one of the kitchen workers might have added the shellfish secretly. The man remembered the cook, who was worried about the boy and concerned about his health, knowing how hard it was for him to be away from home. The caring woman did not want to hurt the guy's pride and prepared a special dish with healthy additives for him. If he had guessed about it, he would never have come there again. The famous painter remembered that one of the workers constantly asked him about everything. Now he understood everything. George said goodbye and said that his villa was located nearby, so he would occasionally drop by the restaurant. Before leaving, the man noticed the empty walls of the establishment and asked not to tell anyone about his visits. Martin was surprised by the guest's words. A cool car and a personal driver indicated high status, so George would not be able to hide his location. Suddenly, a familiar voice from behind asked about the guest. Not believing his ears, the protagonist looked back. An old friend with a suitcase stood nearby. He again did not warn of his arrival. Martin was angry at Dennis's actions. A friend told me that on vacation, instead of going abroad, he decided to stay for 3 days at a friend's place, where it's beautiful and quiet, and where there's always delicious food. The young man appreciated the repairs that his humble friend had done. An old friend noticed a puppy sleeping peacefully on his soft bed in the room. He had not noticed before that the cook loved pets. Dennis decided to pet the cute animal. Martin knew that Charlie didn't allow anyone to touch him except him. The friend was surprised by the change in the chef's mood. He had come to brighten up his loneliness in the distant wilderness, but he realized that he was not welcome. Dennis was interested in how the young man was getting along with the local population. The comrade listened with pity to the story of how the villagers had arranged a celebration in honor of the restaurant owner. The cook tried to convince his friend that he was not bored away from the capital. The sound of a bell rang, indicating a new visitor. Adam was passing by and dropped in to visit Martin. The owner of the establishment was glad to meet us and offered to have lunch. However, the head of the Lee family dropped by for a few minutes to deliver a surprise from his wife. Grace felt good and sewed a gift for the kitchen. The cook couldn't believe that the beautiful mittens were made by his neighbor's hands. Charlie was pleased to see his image on the potholders. The young man thanked the farmer and his attentive wife and promised to definitely use the valuable item. Adam didn't have time to leave when the children entered the restaurant. Bob and Kara shared the good news with their older friend. Their holidays had begun. The boy bragged about his grades and said that he had taken homework for the summer. The next visitor was the village elder. Henry was passing by and saw that the doors were open, so he just went in to say hello to the boy. Dennis heard loud voices and began to watch his friend through the neighboring window with great surprise. The young chef was surrounded by new friends on all sides. The main character really looked rested and smiled happily. The young man was a little upset. He had come to the wilderness to keep his old friend company, but he didn't need it at all. Dennis decided to just relax, noticing that Martin had now learned to communicate with people. At this time, the young man asked the elder what was troubling him. Henry was urgently looking for helpers for the farm. The young man decided to teach a lesson to his friend, who liked to come uninvited. The headman needed extra hands for just a couple of days. Martin told his neighbor that he had little work at the moment and was ready to help, but he had an uninvited guest. Henry was a little upset and was about to go on searching. The protagonist thought about his plan again and informed the headman that the next morning 2 assistants would be ready to come to the villagers. An unsuspecting Dennis was watching his favorite entertainment show. Early in the morning, Martin woke up his friend. Birds were singing outside and it was very beautiful. The city boy had never worked in the field before. Several villagers were weeding. The young cook helped harvest the first potato crop. The main character had already walked through all the beds and did not feel tired at all. The young man thought that without daily training with Francis, he would not have been able to complete the assigned task so easily. Old Lady Barbara noticed that Dennis had been resting for a long time after his unusual work. The friend looked at his comrade with displeasure. He did not expect such an act from him. Having finished their business, the friends took their plates with gusto. The restaurant owner prepared food for all the neighbors in advance. Dennis grumbled about being forced to work on his precious vacation and admired the local scenery with admiration. Martin promised that, in payment, he would fulfill any order his friend gave him. In the evening, the cook began preparing the jambalaya that his friend had dreamed of. The young chef decided to treat Dennis to seafood. The comrade watched the cooking process with delight, not understanding how his old friend could work miracles in the kitchen. The sausages, shrimp, and rice were ready. All that was left was to add the spices. After 2 hours, this amazing Creole dish had steeped and was finally ready. Dennis watched with curiosity as the shaggy pet pounced on his portion. Sitting at the table, Martin asked why his friend had chosen to order the inexpensive dish. The young man remembered their first meeting when a modest guy came to visit him. The chef's apprentice refused to go to the cafe and suggested cooking something tasty at home. Then Dennis was surprised that the guy quickly made a gorgeous dish from a modest set of products. Now everything looked even better, and the friend believed that Martin would do well and be successful. The young cook told his friend the good news. His sense of taste was gradually returning. Dennis enjoyed the food he had prepared and couldn't believe his friend's words. The old comrades sat at the table, sharing their impressions. The young man thought that it would be really good to recover in a distant village, and suggested that Martin return to the capital after his recovery. The furry assistant heard the news and looked closely at the cook. The main character thought about it. He was not ready to go back to where he was constantly scolded and insulted for an unknown reason. So at first, he was afraid of the city. But now he began to like living in the wilderness. Dennis understood the cook's condition. They had been together for several years. A friend advised Martin to take his time and continue his rehabilitation. A friend suggested celebrating a quiet country life. The cook was glad that he had a friend who understood and supported him. The friends raised their improvised glasses, or rather cans of beer, and drank to the bottom. The whole night the young men reminisced about past years and laughed merrily. The next day Dennis left, and the young cook again went to another world, which he told no one about. This time the night captain demonstrated sword-fighting techniques. Training took place almost every day. Despite the fact that the young man had become stronger, Francis easily managed to knock the weapon out of his hands. The guard praised his friend for his tenacity and persistence. However, Martin doubted that he would be able to last more than 5 seconds in the fight. Suddenly, Francis heard some strange sounds in the forest and looked towards the thicket. Liam came out into the clearing with his ward. Luna was glad to meet a man. The night captain made sure that the young cook was familiar with the Beastmen, and the chieftain's assistant greeted the unfamiliar warrior. It suddenly turned out that Martin was the only one who understood the language of the half-beasts. The others needed a translation artifact to talk. Liam asked his new acquaintance to clarify what the man had told him. The young man was taken aback. He had never even thought about why he understood other people's speech. Francis decided that the Beastmen had come to the cook for a reason, so he suggested finishing the training. The captain of the night said goodbye and went home. Martin asked Liam what had happened and why they had come. The bodyguard replied that his little charge was bored and wanted to see a person. When asked about the sword, Martin said that the warrior began teaching him martial arts as a token of gratitude for delicious food. Liam walked thoughtfully around the clearing. He too received treats from the young chef. The protagonist watched the half-beast with apprehension. Finally, the assistant of the leader of the Beastmen tribe returned. He considered that he should pay for the pleasure at least twice and repay the kindness with kindness. Martin tried to refuse, sensing something bad was going to happen. He shared the food free of charge, without expecting any payment for the treats. However, Liam was persistent. He also wanted to teach his new acquaintance the martial arts of his tribe. The young man was very upset. He had enough stress from training with the sword, but he did not want to offend the half-beasts. Luna's bodyguard was ready to conduct the first lesson immediately. Martin had to get down on all fours. Walking on all fours was the basic rule of the race. Until the morning, the main character could not fall asleep after jogging in an unusual position. His body ached much more than after training with the knight. Charlie was nearby, trying to help his poor friend. The young man could not move. Every muscle was shaking from the strain. A new day dawned. Martin rose with difficulty and tried to stretch his aching body. The furry friend licked his sore muscles all night long. His saliva really did have healing properties. The protagonist thanked the assistant, thinking that his human dignity had been broken. It was time to clean the kitchen and take stock of the food. The cook thought about the fact that the Beastmen do not use spices at all. The young man remembered the terrible smell that had filled the werewolf village during the feast. Charlie also agreed that eating tasty meat was much more enjoyable. Martin thought about teaching his new friends how to cook properly. However, it was inconvenient to bring spices to another world every time, so the young chef decided to find a solution to the problem on the spot and went to visit Francis. The small town welcomed the night captain's friend. The main character did not expect to be greeted with such honors. The man was glad that Martin visited him, but in his heart he was offended that the guy had been in the settlement of another race before the people. Francis and his guest walked through the line of knights greeting the unfamiliar guest. The guard said that he held a high position in his city and was ready to meet the young man with all the honors. He had something to show at home. Suddenly, a strange man appeared on the parade ground. A man with a gray beard and a hood hiding his face became interested in the boy he had heard about from the stories of the older knight. Francis greeted the old man. Martin was surprised. He wanted to see the stranger's face. As if hearing the young man's thoughts, the mysterious man removed his hood. The main character guessed who was in front of him by his clothes, staff, and beard. The real magician stood opposite the young cook and looked at the guest. A wizard named Janice greeted Martin and decided to show him his abilities. The sorcerer began to launch fireworks using his staff. Those around watched the fireworks with delight. But it was difficult to surprise the young man with something like that. The capital often hosted celebrations with numerous volleys and amazing lights. Martin compared the miracle to an ordinary sparkler. The magician noticed that the guest was not very surprised by what he saw. Francis and Janice suggested that the guy take a look at the city. In order not to attract the attention of passers-by, the young man had to change into local clothes. The captain of the knights knew why the young man had come and let him go with the sorcerer to the market, going about his business. Martin looked with admiration at the numerous fruits and vegetables that were slightly different from the plants he was used to. Before leaving, Francis warned the young man that he would come for him to a party he was throwing in honor of a friend at his home. The main character walked through the rows with great surprise. He could not have imagined that the local bazaar would be so big. The chef's attention was drawn to an item that looked like a hot pepper. Martin smelled the green stuff and couldn't figure out where it could be used. Janice rushed to help. This product could be used as a vegetable. The captain of the knights specially sent the magician along with the guest to avoid possible conflicts and misunderstandings. The faithful shaggy assistant did not lag behind his friend and followed him everywhere. At first, the young man was surprised by the chief guard's decision to give him an escort. The old man asked the seller to pack the edible item called frames that interested the young man. The young man looked at the package with curiosity, not yet understanding where he could try this vegetable. The young chef wanted to go further for spices and herbs. Having walked around the entire market, Martin and the sorcerer decided to take a rest. The young man held a large bag with food that was valuable to him and thanked the old man for his help. The chef was already dreaming about how he would experiment with new flavors. Janice couldn't understand why the guests needed so many spices. The main character said that he was not going to write scientific articles, but simply wanted to teach and feed his friends, but first try new tastes himself. The magician listened thoughtfully to the guy's words. The white wolf cub was also tired from the long walk and was sleeping peacefully on the bench. The main character prepared for the journey, so he took a supply of food with him. Martin opened the container and offered Janice a snack. The pancakes looked very appetizing. The old man could not refuse the tempting offer. The magician carefully took one envelope. Having put the pancake in his mouth, the wizard froze. He had never experienced such a taste in his life. The protagonist watched the reaction of the attendant. Janice happily asked for another piece. The elder was surprised by the smell and taste of unknown vegetables that were baked in a delicate thin dough. The sorcerer ate, and Martin inquired why Francis had ordered that he be accompanied into the city, thinking that the main reason might be thieves or robbers. The magician didn't have time to answer. Suddenly, Charlie woke up and growled. Janice said that white wolves are ancient noble animals, but there are creatures that do not respect them, including people. One of these was the chief bishop, Charles, who happened to be passing by at the time with his assistants. The priest stopped to greet the strange company. Charles was surprised. In recent years, the magician practically never left his laboratory. He was even more amazed by the presence of the wolf cub. Janice said that he loved to walk in the fresh air, and he was also interested in what Charles was doing at the market. The main character watched the conversation between two high-ranking officials with excitement. At the moment, the bishop was interested in who was the owner of the white predator. Charlie growled menacingly. Martin felt that he had already been in a similar situation in the village of Beastmen. In the werewolf settlement, aggression was directed at the guest. The governor could not accept the presence of a human in his home. Now the young man understood that the church ministers were afraid of his shaggy friend. Charles insisted that the young man go with him to the temple along with his pet. The magician intervened in the conversation and warned the bishop that the young man was a guest and friend of the captain of the knights, to whom he was currently showing the city. The priest was amazed that the sorcerer himself was personally accompanying the stranger. The assistant confirmed the wizard's words. The young man really did look like the man who had been greeted by the squad of knights that morning. Martin held his shaggy friend tightly and watched his interlocutor's reaction carefully. The bishop apologized and suggested postponing the meeting until another time if such an opportunity arose. The magician sat calmly on the bench. He understood that he had done an excellent job with his task. Only now the main character noticed that the sorcerer's staff was burning with a bright light, which meant he had to use his abilities. The temple servants left. Janice calmed down and explained that these people were more dangerous than robbers. Then for 3 hours, the wizard told the guest about the formulas with which he controls magic. When Francis came for the young man, he was already completely tired of the flow of unnecessary information. The captain of the knights took the guy to his home, where his colleagues were already waiting for them. Those present looked with curiosity at the unfamiliar guy, whom their commander personally met. Martin was upset by all the attention and sat at the table with a sad look. The hostess of the house approached the guest and offered to try the meat. Kate was delighted to meet the chef she had heard so much about from her husband. The warriors listened attentively to the conversation, learning that Martin had become one of Francis's few disciples. The daughter of the owner of the house sat down at the table next to the young man. The little girl really liked the furry animal. Her father persuaded her to eat the food and then feed the wolf cub. However, the main character doubted that his shaggy assistant would wait until he was given food. Charlie was already traveling around the plates, destroying pieces of meat. Martin decided to try the local alcohol. The drink was not very tasty. It was clear why Francis kept asking to treat him to beer. There was a large portion of meat on the plate. The main character noticed the oven in which the captain's wife was roasting game. The device was quite compact and had a spit to make it easier to turn the pieces. The young man tasted the meat. The product clearly lacked spices. The young chef tried to determine what herbs the housewife used. Francis said that his wife bought spices at the market and most often added usilia, which was brought from far away. Martin was pleased that he had acquired this potion too. The main character was upset that there were few special herbs growing in the forests. They had to be brought from far away. The young man hoped that he would be able to study local plants and use them in the kitchen. The cook was upset that the Beastmen would not be able to show the necessary seasonings for preparing delicious meat. The knight captain also understood that it was impossible to deliver a large amount of spices to the settlement of the neighboring race. Trade between people in the tribe had ended more than 100 years ago. Martin listened attentively to the story of another world. Suddenly, Francis jumped up. He thought that together with his young friend, he would be able to establish communication between different creatures again. The young man learned that there was a chief lord in the city who was in charge of all matters, including trade. A frustrated Kate returned from the cellar. Given the large number of guests, the alcohol was almost gone. The main character remembered that he came with gifts. After a few minutes, the knights were happily trying the unfamiliar drinks. Francis was the happiest of all. He already knew the delicious taste of beer. Martin didn't know how to answer the numerous questions about where to buy these bottles. The young man did not expect such a joyful reaction from the local residents. The main character told those present that the taste can be improved by mixing 2 alcoholic drinks of different strengths. The knights looked with admiration at the genius who knew the secrets of drinking. Martin received the knowledge from a friend during the celebration of another victory, who shared information on what proportions to mix the potion in. There were cries of delight from all sides. Those around really liked the new taste. The knights tried to find out whether it was possible to change the composition of alcoholic drinks and their quantity.